Getting one shot in League is just like my bot lane going 0-20 and then complaining and flaming each other for the rest of the game and then surrendering in 15 minutes. It happens all the time. The durability patch was there to solve this problem, they getting one shot, specifically at the early stages of the game, pretty much between like the first 10 minutes of the game. And it was pretty great. It changed a whole lot of the structure of the game, kind of just what champions were really good at the time. The build paths changed a whole lot. We kind of went from a burst-oriented meta to more of a DPS, sustained damage meta with a lot more tanks and juggernauts going on. It was actually really interesting, and it didn't actually make the game less interesting personally for me because I play a lot of DPS mages, aka Azir and Asol. You really get the sense of how futile it is when you play those champions after, you know, getting a taste of the greatness that can be. But it was not to be. Nowadays, you don't see a lot of these champions, specifically Azir, being where they were any longer as the month since the patch was released has gone on. What did the durability patch change? How has it changed? Is it still an effect? Do we still kind of feel the effects from the durability patch now? And that is what I'm trying to answer in this video, or at least ask the question of you guys, mainly because I, as a mid laner, have seen some effects and I'd like to talk about them in this video. I also get an idea from you guys, whether you play in different lanes or play the same lane as I do, what effects you felt as we've kind of had a bit more changes, a bit more patches have gone on. So what did the durability patch do if you have been living in a literal cave filled with G Fuel and Mountain Dew and have literally never left your chair? Well, what it did was basically just upped numbers. It was just all numbers, basically. Up the numbers of armor gain and magic resist gain, a little bit more health, a little bit more survivability in general to pretty much everyone. What did that do indirectly? It made things like Liandry's, more sustained damage champions, a lot more viable than they were before. I mean, if you have played any of these champions, aka Azir, because I am an Azir player and we all know how that has been going. Just basically it made them awesome. And you had champions that weren't those, more burst-oriented champions like Zed, Kiana, Talon, Kassadin, and a bunch of others who just weren't getting the kills as often, who were getting their early leads as often. And actually I want to use Zed and Azir as an example of how these things have changed over the month since we started with the durability patch. Early days of the durability patch, you had Azir actually rise significantly in win rate, and actually kind of in a good spot, where he was kind of sitting at a 50 to 51% win rate, fluctuating between those two. His Liandry's build was really good, just the sustained damage from Liandry's and the constant auto attacks with Nashor's Tooth actually made Nashor's Tooth even more viable now, and is still kind of viable now as a build path for him. And you didn't have to build them with tanks. You could build it in any game basically and it'd be super good, which actually led to Liandry's being nerfed slightly later on. Now Zed, unfortunately at the start of the patch, kind of lowered down his win rate. He was down pretty low, lower than he's ever been for a long time. He is usually sat around a 50% win rate with a really high ban rate and a really high pick rate. And that just came from the fact that everyone was a bit tankier at the beginning of the game. It's a lot harder to just burst someone down between the first 10 minutes of the game, and it caused assassins not to be able to get their early leads that they needed, which kind of made them all a lot less viable, to be honest. The patch came out May 24th, and now it is August. So it's been a significant amount of time with a few patches in between that has changed a whole lot of champions and some values on some items and things like that. What has changed and what has been going on? Champions like Azir have been declining win rate wise. Their win rates have gone down. But assassins like Zed, Kiana, and Talon, and a bunch of other ones have basically gone back to the way they were. Now it's kind of unfortunate because I really was enjoying a time when there was really little assassins around. That's not to say that I see them every single game. You see a lot more champions like Echo and Diana and Aurelia a lot more these days, especially specifically in my games. I'm in gold, so I don't know what it is like in higher ranks or lower ranks right now. But right now where I sit, I see a lot of LeBlanc, Kassadin, Echo, Diana, specifically Diana, a lot of Diana, so way too much Diana. You still see things like Sunfire Aegis or something like that, some weird bullshit like Diana with Sunfire Aegis is still around. And I just see Warwick Sunfire Aegis Bork second item, And now I've seen that like played mid like twice, and I don't understand that at all. But it wins. He just runs around and just ganks everywhere, ignores farming for forever, and just goes and like ganks other lanes. It's kind of like a Quinn 2.0 or 1.5 or 0.5. It's strange. But you still get some of that survivability on in the early stages of the game. And I think that's mainly what Riot was trying to accomplish with the patch, which was just making the first few minutes of the game a lot easier for people. You don't die as often in the early game. You rarely, at least as someone like me who is careful about not feeding every single game on Azir, you tend to be a little more careful, and that allows you to survive a lot longer, focus a little bit more on farm, and actually just take in a lot more of the game in the early stages. Pay attention to where your jungle is, pay attention to where your mid lane is going, and things like that. But alongside that, you start to see everything kind of declining for your champions if you play any DPS mages specifically. Azir is back down to his old 47-48% win rate and if you really care about tier lists, he's considered a D tier champion, specifically in any elo below challenger basically. And even there, you don't see him very often. Aurelion Sol still has a good time just because of his roaming capabilities, and that's about it. He's a decent late game mage with a lot of CC, so he has a place in the game. But unfortunately, champions like Azir, and I don't think Cassiopeia is a good place either, or at least where she was before. But champions like Zed and Kiana and Kassadin, a lot of those have gone back up and are now just meta again. I don't know what it is like for other lanes. The mid lane meta is basically just the same as it was before. A lot of high burst champions, and they just go around and roam and burst other lanes early on in the game. Even if you're careful in mid lane, any champion with any sort of roaming capability or a champion that can just come in and burst really fast early on tends to do well in the mid lane. Or a champion like Victor who you just like spend 20 minutes doing nothing and then you build your Ludens and then boom, you win the game. So that goes, the question is, do these patches even do anything in the first place if they're just going to keep changing it all the time? You introduce something like the durability patch, which is supposedly supposed to increase everyone's survivability, but then when you go and change everything around that, then it just tends to nullify the experience and you just end up with the same type again in the long run. Yeah, the first 10 minutes are nice, but the next 20 minutes of the game, if the game or 30 minutes if it goes for a 40-minute game, which is consistently what I'm running into, it just ends up being a fucking unga bunga, hit buttons, do damage kind of meta. Sure, there might be, I'm not saying that there isn't strategy, I'm not saying there isn't tactics, I'm not saying there isn't some sort of like but if you're just sitting there just like, well, we're just gonna hide in the bush and we're gonna wait for them to walk by and then boom, they're dead. So has the durability patch really worked in my opinion? Yes and no. Yes, in the way that Riot accomplished what they set out to do. They did what they wanted to do, and that's fine. They made it so that the early game is a lot more consistent, survivability is up. I believe that more people are surviving through the early game stages a lot more now, specifically in your own lane. We're not talking about like roaming, there's a lot of variables involved, but if you're fighting 1v1 with someone in your lane or 2v2 in the bot lane, you're going to survive a lot more. However, no, because in the way that we wanted it was a meta that wasn't consistently filled with burst champions all the time and just like literally get killed in a second more than I can like react to. And that still consistently happens, especially when you have a lot more roaming happening lately and a lot more just like the mid lanes basically, unless your opponent gets a kill within the first 2 minutes, they're just never going to be mid lane or just going to leave the lane all the time, which is fine if you're playing a champion that roams a lot. I play a lot of champions that, unless I'm playing Aurelion Sol otherwise, I play a lot of Azir, I play some other champions that don't do a whole lot of roaming or can't roam as effectively as the champions I'm fighting against. A lot of the times when you have a meta like this, where it's just like burst is still kind of king, you have, and again, I'm saying this at least just in where I sit in the ranked system in gold elo, that is the way it is. I'm not trying to assume that it's that way everywhere else, but at least where I sit, that seems to be the case, where if you roam really well and you roam really fast, it doesn't matter if you lose like 20 CS at the end of the day. It's because, well, you've gotten ahead, you've demoralized the enemy team, and their mental's gonna boom anyway. If you can't react to a gank, which most people don't seem to be able to do, at least quickly enough, or understand like that there's like someone who's going to roam, because the mid lane is going to be at a standstill most of the time, specifically if you're playing with a champion like Azir or a Soul or a Talia, champions who need a little bit more time to get going. There's gonna be a lot more roaming happening, and that means that assassins like Kiana, Kassadin, Echo, even Zed are going to be a lot more king these days, even with the durability patch. And to be honest, this is what I expected. I didn't really expect it to change very much. It only really changed the first few minutes of the game, which really didn't affect me at all because I'm a pretty careful player anyway. Most of the time, I'm most of the time, okay? If you watch the stream, then you'll know that I'm not always as attentive to seeing where the jungler is going all the time. I get really hyper focused on like farming that one minion, and then all of a sudden there's a Fiddlesticks behind me or something, or Diana's come out of the blue or behind me from the jungle. I don't know. There's too much to look at. But yeah, it's just the early game that's been changed, and the game's pretty much the same as it was before the durability patch, at least in my eyes, with a few caveats here and there. So yeah, that was what I wanted to say about the durability patch. What do you guys think? Please do tell me down below in the comments, especially if you come from another lane. I'd like to hear your perspective, like top laners, what has changed now that the durability patch has been through some more patches as the month has gone on, and bot laners and jungles, what has changed? Jungle is always weird, like, I don't know, in gold at least, there's just never really a consistent amount, like, I don't know really who's meta in jungle anymore. I don't see a whole lot else going on. I think tanks are still meta in jungle, maybe, I don't know. For all of you who have made it this far, I appreciate it. I am kind of changing my style of video a little bit because making videos is anxiety inducing for me a little bit, particularly because I'm a perfectionist, and also I just care way too much about what other people think about what I do. So thank you for watching it this far, and there's gonna be more videos like this because I like talking about game design a lot of the times and talking about aspects of like mechanics and things like that, which interests me a lot more. Not saying I'm not interested in the game. League of Legends is a fine game and I enjoy it just as much, but I would like to talk more about League of Legends and the things that they changed, and talk about how the game could be possibly better. I kind of did that a little bit already, but I kind of want to keep doing that and kind of just theory crafting a little bit because, yeah, it's something that's interested me. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys in the next one whenever it comes out. Bye-bye.